Hi guys, Matt Easton here. So something I've noticed, particularly in the recent discussions about knives and what types of knives to use for different types of fight, and indeed how to hold those knives, is that a lot of people, when it comes to knife fighting, seem to kind of come out of the woodwork and consider themselves experts. I don't know why this should be the case. I'm not particularly a knife fighting expert at all. I have been teaching medieval dagger stuff for many years. In fact, it was the first thing I ever taught at an international HEMA event, God, like back in 2000 I think it was. But in actual fact, I'm not really specialised in knives. I'm specialised in swords, obviously. And I've done, a fair amount of, in fact, Bowie knife and Fairbairn Sykes and kind of other stuff, modern stuff I've looked at, and friends of mine teach modern self-protection. But I am not a knife fighting expert. However, people seem to get very strong views about knives and how to use them whenever they come up in discussions. And I think this is probably partly because, of course, in terms of modern hand weapons, it is probably the most commonly used modern hand weapon in the modern world. Usually, obviously, in a civilian criminal situation, but equally also in modern warfare as well. Kukris and bayonets and combat knives do occasionally still get used. But really what I want to say in this video is what I would want to steer people away from is having really black and white certain views on things. The fact is that the contexts, and again, this is my favourite word, context, the context for using knives are vast, okay? And you can't say that in all situations, regardless of armour or thick clothing or what type of clothing you're wearing or what type of environment you're fighting in, whether it's an enclosed space, whether you're grappling, whether it's a one-on-one duel, whether it's multiple opponents, a melee type situation, or perhaps there's other weapons involved, other people have got sticks and swords and spears and things like this, or maybe it's everybody else is unarmed but you've got a knife and they're all trying to take you down. There are so many different possible contexts for the use of a knife, and in fact that is partly why there are so many different knife designs, that making these very categorical kind of black and white statements frankly makes you look a bit narrow-minded or perhaps a bit stupid. I'm sorry to say it, but it does. And the fact of the matter is that the world has had knives for an incredibly long time, back into the Stone Age, and probably there were wooden ones before the stone ones were made. And the fact is they've been around for a very long time, and there are dozens and dozens of design. You know what? Not everybody ended up using one style of knife or dagger for combat. There are many different styles of dagger and knife used in combat, and if you take, for example, if we just look at India for a second, one of my favourite countries to refer to, we have something called the katar, or the punch dagger, okay? And yet, despite the fact that they invented this, they did not stop using things like this. They also used khanjars and forms of jambia as well as the punch dagger. They didn't just have one type of knife. Equally in the medieval period, they had basillards, rundle daggers, bollock knives, and something that looks a bit like an early form of Bowie knife. And of course they had saxes and so on earlier in the Middle Ages. So there were many different daggers used in many different ways. When we look at the historical fighting systems, whether it's Filipino martial arts or whether it's German martial arts, whatever we look at, even to an extent whether it's Japanese or Chinese martial arts, when we look at the way that knives and daggers are used, we see that they're used in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you see the saber grip, sometimes you see the ice pick grip, sometimes you see the hammer grip, and it's very important to note that people often divide this into simply point up or point down. The fact is, whilst essentially you can only really hold it point down in an ice pick grip, if you're holding it with the blade above your hand, you can either hold it in a hammer grip or in a saber grip. Very clearly this is not designed to be held in a saber grip because the pommel's in the way. So we end up holding it in a hammer grip, and you'll notice just while I'm talking on the topic that my reach with a hammer grip point down is the same as my reach, point up is the same as the reach point down, because it's the same angle. There's roughly a 90-degree or slightly bigger than 90-degree angle between my forearm and the knife here, and same thing here. Okay, yes, I can extend it a bit forward if I've got it point up, but I can also extend it forward if I have it point down. So in actual fact the reach kind of point becomes somewhat moot, point up and point down. The fact is that there are many different knives and daggers throughout history, all used at the same time, all used in the same places in the same countries, used in slightly different contexts. Maybe one type of knife has an advantage for fighting in in armour, for example a rondel dagger, whereas maybe a bollock knife is better for fighting in civilian environments. Maybe the punch dagger is particularly good against, you know, I don't know, let's just say multiple opponents, I don't actually know. Maybe the khanjar is better in a sort of one-on-one knife duel. The fact of the matter is there's many different scenarios and contexts in which the knife or the dagger can be used, and therefore there are many different daggers and knives that have always existed, that we've never only had one ultimate design of knife or dagger. And therefore there are many methods of use which all have their various merits. There is no one ultimate way of using a knife, and people who try and say that there's an ultimate type of knife and an ultimate way of using it are probably idiots, so don't listen to them. Cheers guys!